Hello. We've got another great reading today, and before I kind of go into it, I'll tell you um, a little bit about the last couple of weeks and why it kind of ties in. That My guys my sons are back in school this week in person, but the previous 2 weeks they've been home and learning virtually and all the growing pains with that so many of us can identify with and understand, and kids or not, you can kind of identify and or at least understand that educating a 6 and 8 year old is probably a lot different, obviously, than a high school student, even because while my 8 year old's pretty self-directed, the 6 year old needs a lot of supervision. But I'm thinking of last week that I had both of them fully situated. Everybody's dressed, teeth are brushed, everyone's been fed, and the books are laid out on a table, and laptops are set up, and everyone is done. Dog's been taken out, and literally my eyes open in the morning, and from that point on, for those 2+ hours, I'm just moving from one thing to the other, and they're set. And so I have this moment where I just want a cup of coffee. I haven't had one yet, and I got this really nice espresso machine I got for Father's Day last year. So I'm over there in the kitchen. I'm just starting to set it up, and my 6 year old has an audio problem. And I'm like, okay, like he's got his hand up, and no one in the room can hear him. So I go over, and while the coffee's running, I go over, I take a knee, and it wasn't a big deal, but it took me a while to figure out how to give it permissions so that the audio would work on a MacBook with Google Classroom and all that kind of stuff. And while I'm doing that, the coffee handle starts turning to the side, and all of a sudden there's like this little pop, and I could look over at the counter. I'm like, there's grinds everywhere, and that's to my left, and to my right the dog is peeing on the ground, and it's just nothing I'm describing is unusual or awful. All of us have those moments where we're trying to take a minute just to do something as simple as have a cup of coffee, and we get pulled in 3 different directions, and we're just exhausted, and isn't that where we find both of our the two main characters from the reading? We have Jesus, which I identify with so intimately, and it's so comforting to me to have an image of God that where he needed to rest, where he had been ministering so much, and the crowds were so overwhelming that he just needed to take a moment. For me, that's comforting. To me, it's comforting to know, like, that image that I have of my faith is this image of Jesus right alongside me, in the celebratory moments, and in the moments of challenge and grief and all that no matter where I land, my faith is right there, and in the scriptures we have that image of Jesus having very human experiences, that moment of exhaustion where he just needed a break, and he doesn't get it. That's kind of where I'm going with my experience from last week, is that he goes, he's going to take that rest, and this woman will not. She comes right in, and the courage it took, because this woman, for the time and the place, it wasn't. Not only was it not appropriate, for that time for her as a woman to go to a man, let alone a rabbi. Like, it was just unprecedented. You don't do that. And to me, like, how much courage it must have taken. And I think about that part of the story, and I'm reminded of the experiences I've heard far too many times in Guatemala each summer, of, my very close friend Herson, who hosts our group through the organization that we go with every summer. Always, when we hear a story of migration, on one of the afternoons, we hear someone from the community gives their story of migration, and every time, and I've heard it from them, but every time, Herson makes a point of recounting a story that he had heard years ago, from a father, from a guy who had this harrowing story of going from Guatemala to the United States, and the experience of the exhaustion, and fear of walking through the desert, of crossing as bad as we may hear the stories of the U.S.-Mexico border, the Mexico-Guatemalan border is even worse, and these harrowing stories, like I said, and this guy just was blow after blow after blow of all the horrible things that had happened, and here he was telling Herson about how he was going to do it again, and he said, aren't you afraid? And he said sometimes, he had these little kids at home, and he said sometimes hunger is greater than fear, and when you're hungry and when your kids are hungry, there is nothing in the world to prevent you from doing what you need. And that's how that's how we come to see this woman from the gospel today, that she did put herself in a position that I'm sure she was afraid. I'm sure she was uncomfortable, not only going out of her way in a cultural context of like, you don't do this, but it was not only a man that she was plowing through and saying, no, I need you now, but it was a rabbi, it was a person of a really prominent individual, and she went right up because her daughter needed her, and in that moment, we have an image of God that of course goes to her, and so there's a lot today. I mean, that's kind of recapping it, but the idea that, for all of us, for me today, the invitation is to remind myself that, like, we all need rest. Just as Jesus was seeking that moment of rest, and that moment to kind of step aside from life, as so many of us have had the opportunity to in almost a year to, some people have been busier now than they ever were prior to the pandemic. We have, there are jobs and especially in the medical profession, but, there's a lot of people who I know who have been working more, but for many of us, things got smaller, and that was that time to rest, and the hope and the dream is that as we kind of progressively go further and further back to something that resembles normal, that we continue to prioritize that rest, and so we can step back from our lives and make sure that as we go into a new normal, that our faith is front and center, and then we're also reminded, we have that other image and that invitation today to consider that, no matter where we find ourselves, we have this image of a woman who had the courage, to walk through fear. No matter what we are afraid of, no matter what we are intimidated by, God meets us where we are, and those are two wonderful things to be invited to consider today. I hope you are all safe and well, and as I say every week, hopefully we'll see you soon, and until then, at the very latest, I will see you here next Thursday. Thank you.